My name is Mary Conquest. I'm your host for Safety Labs, the podcast where we explore the human side of safety to support safety professionals. We move past regulations and reportables to talk about the core skills of safety leadership: empathy, influence, trust, rapport. In other words, the soft skills that help you do the hard stuff. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Hi there, welcome to Safety Labs. I often ask my guests about where they think training for the next generation of safety professionals should focus. Something like, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about occupational health and safety education? My guest today might not have a magic wand, but she's deeply committed to OHS education. She teaches students about safety, some of whom are planning to be safety practitioners and some of whom have other plans and need to integrate safety principles into their future careers. Dr. Ashley Gill, CSP, has over 18 years experience in OHS and holds a doctorate in business administration, focused on organizational behavior and informal safety leadership. Dr. Gill champions culture change through HOP principles. She's facilitated detailed hazard assessments, led systematic incident investigations, developed and audited compliance programs, and implemented OSHA-compliant safety systems across general industry and construction standards. Ashley was awarded the 2022 Safety Professional of the Year by her local ASSP chapter. She's currently a consultant and adjunct instructor at both Tarleton University's Engineering Technology Department and East Texas A&M University's College of Innovation and Design. Ashley joins us from Fort Worth, Texas. Welcome.
Hello, how are you?
Good. I'm excited for this topic. I like all things education. To give listeners a bit of an idea, what sort of courses and topics have you taught, like if you're looking at your career at large, and what are you focusing on now?
So by and large, most of the coursework that I have been providing over the last 2 decades of my career has been a lot of OSHA 10-hour, OSHA 30-hour, 40-hour HAZWOPER, 24-hour HAZWOPER. And that was a lot from what my career was or the industries or the organizations that I was working for. Over the last 2 or 3 years, though, when I've shifted to being able to serve as an adjunct professor at some of the local colleges, I have predominantly focused my efforts on industrial safety, construction safety, waste management, and pretty much safety management programs holistically. So
at the college, I think you teach both young students that haven't really been in the workforce yet, and also seasoned safety professionals that are upgrading, perhaps. How are these two groups, how do they compare? And not in a negative way, but like sort of what advantage does each group have?
So I think that I enjoy teaching the fresh out, really don't have a lot of real world experience yet, just because they're so engaged and they just genuinely want to know what's out there and what's the best way to do that. They're very open to feedback, and just from a big picture perspective, they don't really know what's out there yet for them, and they haven't really developed any of that sort of, a bad experience in safety or dealing with a bad safety manager. They haven't had that exposure yet. So being able to get on their foundational learning in around safety is really rewarding for me in that aspect. But I will say an attribute for the seasoned professionals, the ones that are going back to school to work on a degree, bring a lot more real world application to the projects and to the conversations, the discussion boards and their homework that we don't typically get to see with the kids that haven't really had any experience in the workforce yet, or maybe have been limited to an internship or to a couple summers. So I get so much value out of both groups because I can kind of set the foundation for the new generation coming in, but also get to learn from other, grown professionals out in the workforce on what they're doing and what their experience have been to date.
And do they tend to be in the same classes, or are they kind of in different streams?
I think I will say that a lot of my coursework that I deliver, the safety coursework, runs the gamut. I do have folks that are in the work world. I think last semester was amazing. I actually had a serviceman that were actually overseas doing some work over there. So we were trying to juggle like when the submission times were and how that worked for them. But I also have the students that are just Monday through Friday. They're there on campus and they're going to classes. So we see both sides of it in my coursework.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was like cross-pollination, like if maybe the more experienced people are kind of inspired by the energy of the young folks, and maybe the young folks are really interested in hearing about real world experiences.
I put a lot of focus on those open kind of discussion boards that we have just because I don't meet with them face to face in person. So that's the best method to kind of allow that cross pollination to happen. So I think through those discussion boards that we have available to the students, they can read each other's lived experiences and share and interact with each other's posts as much as you would on social media, giving something a thumbs up. So I think that certainly helps in allowing us to really facilitate learning and growth, irrelevant of where they are on their journey in education.
Right. Okay. So, and I know that you teach engineers, so people who are not training to be safety professionals. They're in kind of an adjacent path, but you teach them safety. So, tell me about that. How does safety intersect with engineering?
So the industrial safety class that I teach is really unique in that it is housed within the Mayfield College of Engineering at Tarleton State University. And it really is sort of an introductory course to these kids that are going to be going into the workforce as project engineers, as chemical engineers, as HVAC, like all the different things. It gives them a real baseline of health and safety. I think the unique perspective that we can bring to the table as far as those types of students specifically is a lot of these engineering kids that I have in class don't realize that there's a whole world of safety out there that still needs engineers. I always give the example of I've spent $20,000 or $30,000 on fall protection equipment in my industry time, and that took an engineer to essentially come in and help me do the measurements and help me figure out I had the right weight rating on those pieces of equipment. So I think that that's very unique in that these are the youth that are going into the engineering program just don't realize that this course can kind of set them up for some success going on down the line. And even if they don't end up in a safety adjacent career, they still do need to take safety into the designs and the work that they're doing, because it's always easier to do the legwork on safety before a design's finalized versus go back in after something's already been manufactured and built and say, hey, oh, we forgot about XYZ. Now we have to go spend all this money to put it back in place.
Yeah, I think last time we spoke, you mentioned really just kind of teaching them the right questions to ask throughout the design process and to try and anticipate things like workarounds that might happen if the design doesn't take safety into account.
Yeah, I always use the example of actual lived experience of mine personally was with machine guarding, something that absolutely we know is important. All safety professionals are going to be trained to essentially look for that. But what was happening is the engineering group were designing machine guards. These machine guards were pretty large, well over 50 pounds, something that was not going to be a single person lift in the safety world, right? It was something that we would either need equipment to move or two people to lift. But in reality, talking to those engineers, I'm like, do you really think somebody is going to go find their buddy to help them remove this machine guard, or are they just going to try to muscle it themselves because it's the short, easy route? And it was interesting to see the little light bulb, right? That they're like, oh, yeah, I don't know that they're going to go find somebody. So it put them back to the drawing board a little bit to how can we design these machine guards in such a way that a single person can safely maneuver these when they need to remove them for maintenance or cleaning or whatever the case is.
Yeah, it's kind of expanding their perspective, because I would think, anyway, I'm not an engineer, but they would envision the user of whatever they're designing as someone who is attempting to use this item correctly, but they're not envisioning someone who's also under pressure to produce quickly, right? Time constraints or weather constraints or that sort of thing. Well, I guess they probably study weather, but
Yeah, absolutely.
last time, and I want to get back to it because you mentioned it a minute ago here. You mentioned that students don't always realize how robust a career they can have in safety. Can you tell me more just about your view on that?
So I came up through the ranks pretty untraditional. I think a lot of safety professionals can probably say something similar is that, I don't have safety degrees. I don't have a degree in occupational health and safety. I have degrees that are business degrees. When I graduated with my undergrad, I had this sense that I was going to go into logistics or international sales or freight forwarding or something in my first job that I got out of college. And within a few weeks of being on the job, I witnessed my first work-related injury, and I was like, somebody should have done something here. And that internal reflection on that moment was, well, maybe I'm that somebody. So I kind of took it upon myself then at that point to really immerse myself in everything there was about industrial safety, safety management systems, and just being able to provide that protection to workers and know that we have a robust enough program that we do in fact send them home in one piece every single day. So I think that just demonstrates that there is always a career path into safety. It's just some of us get there in little non-traditional ways if we don't go to a formal bachelor's or master's program that's occupational health and safety. But there's so much opportunity out there in this field of work right now.
I wanted to ask, you've been doing this for quite a while now. Are there more opportunities now for, like, let's say someone is starting out and they do want to go straight into occupational health and safety. Are there more educational options for them now?
Yes, there is so much opportunity out there. If a individual is interested in getting into safety and they haven't had the opportunity, or maybe they go to a college that doesn't necessarily give them or afford them the opportunity to take safety classes, there are a ton of great OSHA authorized training institutes. I have actually done some of my programming through Arlington at UTA Arlington. So they're out there and they are actually more robust and plentiful now than I think that they probably were 10 or 20 years ago when I was first getting started. And I think Teaks in Mesquite, Texas also has a very similar program. And I can't imagine anywhere in the US is probably going to have those opportunities available either in person or virtually. That virtual shift really has happened a lot since the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, OSHA, I feel like, wasn't really on board with a lot of the remote or virtual training with good reason, I'm certain. But now things have shifted a little bit and more is being available to people that maybe can't fit that traditional, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday coursework in, especially people that are going back to school and still have to maintain full-time jobs.
Yeah, it's interesting how many organizations felt that virtual just couldn't work. And then when it had to work, we made it work. And I think there's been a lot of benefit from that. Do you ever see, so we've talked about, or we're just talking about students who are starting out in health and safety, but when you're teaching engineers or really anyone else on a different career path, do you ever sort of see them discover occupational health and safety? Like, how do they respond to OHS if they've never encountered or thought of it before?
I definitely see this a lot, not only with my engineers, the industrial safety folks, but also the construction safety managers that are going through my class. These are the future managers of construction projects and sites. So seeing them actually think through the concept of what safety looks like on a job site or in a project, driven by obviously their assignments in the course, is pretty fulfilling for me, in that I challenge them more often than not. Like, listen, think through this project that you're thinking of right now. What's going to go wrong? When's it going to go wrong? How's it going to go wrong? And try to put those controls, those mitigation pieces in place on the front end, so you're not chasing your tail on down the line. My construction safety management kids, they do like a site specific health and safety plan as their end of year project. So they have to think of a company and design a fictitious project, and they have to walk through all those what ifs, all those components of what would be required or expected if this was an actual real job site that they would be on and managing. You know, great that there's 6 stories you're building. What happens if something goes wrong on story 6 and people have to evacuate? So it's just kind of those sorts of conversations that are really helpful to have with those kids, just to get them that realization that, oh, things don't go according to plan. No, they definitely don't on a job site any given day.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So if you're getting kids, some of them must, this is a required course, right? I imagine in some programs. So do you ever get any pushback? Like, do any of them kind of come in with like, oh, safety, if everyone would just follow the rules and I don't have to think about it? Or do you think they're a little more open than that?
I want to say most of the generation, at least that I'm instructing right now in this coursework, is pretty open. I will say that I think some of the the historical safety cop mentality still sort of exists, and they think that that's how things should go. Safety professionals now know we've kind of evolved past the whole blame and retrain model that, you know, fire somebody before they hit the ground if they are falling. Just kind of those concepts. I still see some of that creep in, but it is certainly not as common as the conversations I had around this sort of philosophy a decade ago. So I think that these kids that I'm instructing, these young adults, they do realize that a genuine conversation with somebody and making sure we understand the systems that are in place around what they're discussing are robust enough to where when somebody makes a mistake, because we know that they will, that person's still protected.
Okay, so you've talked a little bit about, you just mentioned a little bit about how EHS education or attitudes have changed. And you mentioned that there are a lot more options. Has the content of EHS, OHS courses changed? Has it shifted focus? Because I know there's been a lot of research, there's been a lot of discussion in the last 5-10 years. Has that had any effect?
So we are seeing a little bit of a shift now, at least in the textbooks in which my classes are operating out of, to where we are trying to get away from that. The solution isn't always writing somebody up, that we do need to take some of these ethical components into consideration on job sites. It is slowly coming around in the textbooks. I think instructors like myself, probably many others, we have been talking around some of these components for a really long time to be like, the stick or carrot concept. How are we going to get a little bit further? We're probably going to get a little further with the carrot. How can we entice folks to buy into the process or buy into the policy or whatever we're trying to do? Because it is the safest, but also because we know safety, quality, environmental, all of those components at the end of the day still cohesively have to operate together to be successful.
I think that societal, or in this case, not societal change, but change within a particular industry, safety, I think sometimes that takes a while to get into the education because people talk about it, people try it out, professionals start to change their mind, and only then I think maybe does it start making its way into curriculum.
Behavior's hard. It's a tricky area, especially all things considered. People come from different backgrounds. There's different cultures. I mean, the U.S. is a melting pot. You're going to get all kinds of different folks on a construction safety meeting or presentation. So you really have to be able to find that foundational baseline of what behaviors you want people to have, and then that whole lead by example sort of concept with managers on these sites that, if you're expecting folks to wear all this PPE on a site, then when you go out there and talk to folks, which you should also be wearing that same PPE and walking the talk, essentially, I guess, if you will. Like I said, the behavior part is hard. I mean, we're seeing the evolution of a lot of different things in this space too. And I just this year actually swapped out a component of my course and actually put in a little bit of AI and robotics and machine learning component into one of these courses. It's there, but not robust there as far as the curriculum and materials. So I've brought in some additional research and some additional components to also kind of lean into that, because I know that that is coming, that a lot of firms are using a lot of different technology than we have seen prior to the last few months. It seems like it just goes so quick.
Yeah, and because it's so quick, it's a little bit hard to you're trying to
Yeah.
teach them, prepare them for something, but we don't quite know exactly what that something is going to look like.
But at least with the AI robotics, at least some of the principles that we've always seen as far as machine guarding, safeguards around equipment, a lot of that still sort of applies for robotics, right? You have a robot moving into space, you're going to put some barricades and things around it because you don't want somebody in that space while it's moving. So while we don't know what it will probably continue to evolve into, at least foundationally, we have a good grasp of what some of those risks and hazards are, to be able to say, yeah, these controls apply. So I feel pretty confident that at least the tools I'm giving my students in my curriculums are at least giving them a good, solid foundation to what this will probably evolve to long term.
Yeah, and I think a lot of education isn't necessarily like predicting everything, every decision you will have to face in the future. It's teaching you how to think about it. So on that path, when new students join, they're generally young and inexperienced. What, other than the things that are actually on the curriculum, which of course they don't know, do you see any sort of trends? Are there a kind of like people skills or critical thinking skills that they often lack and kind of need to learn?
I can honestly say that yes, absolutely. And I see it in my full-time career as a consultant as well, in some of the safety transformation space in which I operate, is that I think right now the people that are expected to execute work on job sites have really come up through the ranks really quick, either in safety, operations, environmental, whatever the case is. And along the way, in an effort to make sure that the company has the people in place to manage whatever the various component is, that we've lost some of those soft skills along the way and moving them up, that I see sometimes lacking in your line supervisors, or your foremen or supervisors on a project. So I really try to focus a lot of the conversations I have with some of my students on, hey, how do we ask open-ended questions? What does that look like? How do we get people to engage with us? How do we get people to share with us? And a lot of it goes back to me telling the students, you're gonna be most successful if you always just go into a conversation with a learning attitude. We don't know everything. A safety professional, if some safety professional out there says they do, they're lying. We don't always know all the things. And I always look at that person that's doing that job out in the world. They are the subject matter experts of the work as it's being done that day. So we absolutely have so much that we can learn from them if we just be quiet and listen.
Yeah, I think too that and this is all industries, there's a tendency that someone who is on the tools, like regardless of whether those are, you know, computers, radios, or any kind of manufacturing thing, people who are on the tools and do really well, as you said, they move up into management, but managing people and doing the technical thing, are very different. They're very different. And I've seen that in other industries too, where there's just okay, now you're managing, but we're not going to give you any management training.
Yeah. I see it in the real world in my real job. So I do try to have some of those conversations with students when they're willing to sit down and have a chat. It's something that's a lot harder to put in a curriculum or put in a syllabus and just say, here, read this book. It really is a conversation that has to happen on, you know, here's how we ask about the work any given day. Here's how we ask what the risks are. Here's how we know what the controls are. Again, we may not know, but I can assure you that person that's doing that job does know.
I was speaking earlier today with another safety professional. I mentioned that I was going to have this conversation, and she said that in her experience, engineers, because I've said that you teach engineers in the manufacturing industry don't know much about safety. Does that view sound familiar to you?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I love the course that I teach. I think that my students, based on my evals, get a lot out of that course. And some of the feedback I do get is like, "Hey, can we? I wish we could do more of this. I wish there was more we could learn, but we're restricted to that one semester of a coursework, and they don't get any other safety classes. So unless they go out of their way to maybe get a minor in occupational health and safety, if that's something that's available to them, I do feel like some of these engineers may be a little ill-equipped from the start, just because all they have is foundational, maybe barely an OSHA 10, which we expect on some job sites any average worker to have. So I do think that there's a little bit of a disconnect in getting those individuals up to speed on what safety actually really looks like in the real world, no matter how much training I can give them in my curriculum.
How do you think most working safety professionals currently view workers in adjacent jobs? So, like she mentioned that engineers don't know much about safety, and so this is in terms of safety, like chemists, contractors, architects. Do you feel like safety professionals are generally frustrated by other people's lack of knowledge, or are they take it in stride? Like, do you have a view on that?
I personally take it in stride. I mean, like I said, the world of safety is so robust. There's so many different industries. What applies in a manufacturing facility won't necessarily apply on a construction site, because we know OSHA has two different sets of regulations and a completely different regulation from maritime. So there's a lot of different moving pieces. And I think that that just demonstrates a little bit more value to organizations in having, an EHS manager, supervisor, director on staff, because of that reason, that we have a more holistic view of what those programs should be. And I think that a very strong safety manager or EHS manager in an organization should be able to really facilitate some of those conversations that are happening amongst those folks. If I've always said, if a safety manager is sitting at their desk all day every day, they're probably missing the boat on a lot of the great work they could be doing if they just had conversations with some of those different parts of the organization.
So I think what you just said is maybe a partial answer to my next question, which is what might help improve the safety bona fides of people who are in adjacent careers. So these are people who are working, but they're not working as safety managers. So it sounds like conversations with safety managers is one of them.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm a firm believer, always have been the last 2 decades, and now I, help consult folks in the same concept of go and spend 30 minutes or even 2 hours, depending on what schedules allow. Go and spend that time with that chemist. Go spend that time with that foreman. Just walk beside them, talk beside them, have engagements with the folks that they're talking to, and use that as an opportunity to kind of sprinkle in some of those important safety components that they may or may not know. But if they do know, it might be a great refresher. But in that atmosphere, it's not combative. It's not aggressive. It's just two people that are looking to learn from one another and hopefully make the company a little more successful in the end.
I think the motivation to keep people safe is not suspect. You know what I mean? Like,
No, yeah,
I think that
absolutely.
if you're talking to someone and it's clear, like, hey, my whole job is to keep people safe. I think that's a great way in to start.
It's the whole help me help you model. What can I do today to help set you up for success, either in environmental, in safety, in quality? Because again, everybody can rise together if we are having these kind of conversations with folks.
Is there something that you would like to see develop in education, like a direction you'd like to see safety education go in terms of curriculum, like more about mental health or more about, I don't know. Is there anything where you're like, this is good, but we really need to push more in this direction?
I would absolutely say you're spot on. We are, I think, holistically in most safety programs, still focused on the physical hazards that are out there in the workplaces. And not everybody is either comfortable or knowledgeable to really understand the whole well-being, the mental well-being piece that is equally, if not more impactful than the physical hazards themselves. So I would love to see, you know, in whatever environment in which this can happen, either, in curriculums for these OHS classes or programs, to even companies taking some time out of their safety training to say, okay, these are some of the things that happen out there when we're not holistically all in one place and operating at the same wavelength. We just see, I think a recent survey I read is something like 86%. I'd have to double check the numbers, but ERM, my company, does like an annual safety survey every year, and 86% of safety professionals are very concerned about the current level of conversation and training and education around those psychosocial risks that exist in our workplace. So, 100%, that is it.
Okay. And are there any other areas that you think we should develop more? I mean, we can always do better in everything, of course, but
I think additionally, I would like to see us put more value on, what's the best way to put this? Everybody can look good on paper. You have all the right policies, you have all the right procedures. But when you get in a situation where, a company maybe has all of those things in place, but they're still having fatalities, we know that there's something still wrong. And I don't think a lot of organizations really grasp the culture piece. So I would like to see us holistically in the safety profession get a better understanding that culture is culture at the end of the day. And it's a pet peeve of mine when I hear people say things like, oh, the safety culture at this organization. I'm like, your safety culture is your culture. I would like to see that evolution to where it's fully embraced as this is just our culture, and focusing in on hey, if we still having bad things happen, maybe it's a systems piece. Maybe it's not necessarily our people. And I think that we have a lot of room for improvement in that regard.
okay, it's a bit cheeky, but what's your favorite part of teaching? What's your favorite part of interacting with the kids?
I get to interact with a lot of folks in different stages, not just my students, but I also present at conferences and things like that. So I get those continuing education type students as well that are going and wanting to get those credits. I think the the best part of teaching is literally when we get the aha moments, like, huh, I hadn't even thought about that. I didn't know that was a thing, when it comes to just the general what safety looks like in a work environment. And I think that the second component that I love about teaching is knowing I have such an impact on setting my students up for success, either giving them the tools that they need to be successful in their future endeavors, getting them tied into an internship or getting them an interview with somebody in my network. Those are things that I get so much joy and value out of that keeps me coming back every single semester to do what I do.
I want to take a little bit of a pivot here. You're on the awards committee for WISE, Women in Safety Excellence. Can you just quickly tell me a bit about that organization, what they do, and why it's important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So WISE is a community that's within the ASSP, the American Society of Safety Professionals. So WISE is phenomenal. I felt like I didn't really have much to lean into when I first started my safety career, and I looked around the room and I'm the only female that was there. So for us to have this group of women in itself is pretty impactful. But the work that I do in the awards and honors committee is essentially we put an open nomination out every single month, and folks can self-submit or people can submit a nomination to do our WISE member of the month. And it just gives us that increased bandwidth to really feature some of the amazing women and WISE guys. We do have WISE guys as well that are doing such cool, great work out in the safety community. So I just love the reach that we get and the momentum that we get from some of these events to be able to help the person that's trying to move to the next level or just get more information, but also to celebrate the women in safety that are out there just just doing phenomenal work.
If there's a listener out there who's thinking, oh, Wise, I haven't heard of them, and they'd like to get in touch, how should they find the organization? Like, is it through their local ASSP or?
50-50 maybe. ASSP, the main website, and finding Wise through that main website, that'll get you connected essentially to the main big group of all of Wise. Some local chapters do actually have a little Wise group as a part of the local chapters as well. So if you get connected to your local chapter, certainly inquiring into if they have a group. I know here specifically where I am in Dallas-Fort Worth, we're just starting the North Texas Wise chapter. We're really excited about that. I think Boston actually just started theirs as well. So if you don't have anything local, that big Wise group is still very active. We still get together. We still have trainings. We still chat. Really active, a Facebook group and a LinkedIn group as well.
Great. Okay. So normally at this stage, I ask people about what they think students should learn in safety. And that's kind of been what we've been talking about all along. So your question is a little different. If you were giving advice to a young person, think like niece, nephew, something like that, going into engineering or safety, what would you recommend they think about, or how would you recommend they think about it in order to get a leg up in their career, in their safety career, I would say?
That's a great question. My advice, I think, to those individuals will be make the jump, take the risk. I know travel and moving can be really intimidating for a lot of folks, especially if they're fresh out of school, really not sure, maybe have a partner, maybe have family they do want to stay around. But take that risk, take that gamble, if you will, and jump on a job that maybe is 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, because there's a chance you're going to get a phenomenal experience doing some really cool work and probably meet some very cool people along the way who might just be your next boss. So, and that's based on my personal experience.
Yeah. Okay. So that's leads me right into the next question, which is, if you could go back in time to the beginning of your safety career, what's one piece of advice that you might give to yourself?
Don't be a safety cop. And I don't need to be the smartest person in the room. I don't need to know everything. I had to have the resources to go and ask the right questions. And I think very early on, I didn't know enough. I didn't know who to talk to or where to go to. So I spent a lot of time as the proverbial safety cop. Hey, wear your hard hat or I'm going to write you up. Hey, you didn't complete this training on time. You're losing your pizza lunch or whatever the case is. I think if I could change anything, I would change that, in that I don't have to know everything. I just have to know where to go to find the information. Takes a lot of pressure off myself.
Yeah, exactly. So how can our listeners learn more about any of the topics in our discussion today? Like, are there books that or websites, concepts, projects that you recommend to, again, not just young, but any safety professionals?
So selfishly, I would like to direct everybody to my LinkedIn. I do take time I'd say every week, every couple weeks. I'm an avid reader. I read a lot of books on a lot of different, not just safety, but also just general how can I be a better human? But I try to tie a lot of those book reviews back to safety and kind of how we as safety professionals can get a little bit better at what we do. So certainly jumping on my LinkedIn, getting connected with me, seeing some of the stuff that we're doing there, as well as some of the stuff that I'm doing with the ASSP as well. So I would love everybody to go there, but there's so much great resources out there right now. A lot of the things that we sort of talked about today are around HOP, reading anything you can about human error, any of the soft skills. How do we talk to people? What kind of person am I in my delivery? Am I one of the ones that's cracking jokes or kitschy, or am I one of the ones that I'm comfortable tugging on somebody's heartstrings a little bit? There's some phenomenal authors out there right now in this sort of space. So I would absolutely recommend take a Google, figure out human organizational performance, the Sidney Deckers of the world. Absolutely phenomenal.
And if someone wanted to, you mentioned LinkedIn, but if someone wanted to reach out to you specifically, is LinkedIn the best place, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. All my contact information is on there. Again, I present at a lot of different conferences. So I always direct people there that, want to chat, want to get connected, happy to set up some time. I love to connect with people in our community.
Great. Well, that is our show for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Ashley.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thanks to our listeners and the Safety Labs team. We're immensely proud of the work that we do on the show, and we sincerely hope that we're helping listeners improve their safety practice with these discussions. Bye for now. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Until next time, stay safe.